My name is Aaron, and this is a true experience that happened to me when I was still in senior high school. I've tried to convince myself over the years that there was a logical explanation, but some details still refuse to make sense. At the time, I was an average student who stayed late at school almost every day. I was part of a group that worked on projects after class, and I often volunteered to clean up once everyone else had gone home. Our school was old, built decades earlier, with long hallways and concrete walls that held onto sound. At night, the place felt bigger than it was during the day. Most teachers left by 6 in the evening, and the guards usually stayed near the front gate. Once it got late, the classrooms and corridors were left in near total silence. One night, I stayed behind to finish a project in our classroom on the 3rd floor. My classmates left one by one, until I was the only person left. I remember checking the time and realizing it was already past 7. The sky outside the windows had gone completely dark. I packed my bag and turned off the lights, planning to leave immediately. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed how quiet it was. The sound of my footsteps echoed more than usual. Each step seemed to travel farther than it should have. Halfway down the corridor, I heard someone call my name. The voice came from behind me, near our classroom. I stopped walking, confused, and looked back. The hallway was empty, and the classroom door was already locked. I assumed it was another student playing a joke, even though I knew everyone had already left. I called out, asking who it was. No one answered. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I started walking again, telling myself not to overthink it. That was when I heard the voice a second time. This time, it was closer and clearer. It sounded exactly like my class advisor, calling my name in a calm tone. My first reaction was relief. I thought maybe I had missed a meeting or left something important behind. I turned around again, walked toward the sound. As I did, I noticed something strange. The classroom lights in the distance were off, but I could still hear the voice. There was no sign of anyone actually standing there. I stopped walking when I reached the door. The voice continued, now coming from inside the dark room. I reached for the door handle, but something inside me hesitated. I suddenly remembered that my advisor had left early that day. A chill ran through my body as the realization settled in. The voice continued to speak, asking me why I wasn't coming inside. I stepped back slowly, my heart pounding. The voice changed slightly, sounding more impatient. I turned and ran down the hallway without looking back. My footsteps echoed wildly as fear took over. When I reached the stairwell, I heard footsteps following me. They matched my pace perfectly. I ran down the stairs, skipping steps, not daring to slow down. The sound stayed right behind me. When I reached the 1st floor, everything went silent again. I burst out through the main door and didn't stop running until I reached the gate. The security guard looked at me like something was wrong. He asked why I was still inside the school so late. I told him what happened, my voice shaking as I tried to explain. His expression changed in a way I'll never forget. He told me I wasn't the first student to report hearing familiar voices after dark. Some students had followed them and gotten lost inside the building. I never stayed late at school again after that night. Even now, when I walk past empty hallways, I remember how that voice sounded like someone I trusted. What frightens me most is how convincing it was. It didn't sound angry or threatening, just patient, like it knew I would eventually listen. I never stayed late at school again after that night. Even now, when I walk past empty hallways, I remember how that voice sounded like someone I trusted. What frightens me most is how convincing it was. It didn't sound angry or threatening, just patient, like it knew I would eventually listen. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least it felt like it did. I started to believe that fear had exaggerated my memory. Then came exam week. I didn't have a choice but to stay late again. The library was open until 8, and I needed the quiet to study. I told myself it would be fine, since guards were still on campus. The library was on the second floor, far from the classroom where the first incident happened. I felt safer knowing that night there were a few other students scattered around the room. Their presence made me relax. As the minutes passed, one by one, they packed their bags and left. Eventually, I realized I was alone again. I checked the time and saw it was almost 8. The librarian reminded me the building would close soon. I hurriedly gathered my things and headed toward the stairs. The lights were still on, but the hallway felt colder than usual. As I walked, I noticed something strange about the sound of my footsteps. They didn't echo the same way they usually did. It felt like the hallway was absorbing the noise. That uneasy feeling returned almost immediately. Halfway to the stairs, I heard a chair scrape behind me. The sound came from the library. I froze and listened. No voices followed, just silence. I assumed someone had forgotten something and was still inside. I didn't look back. As I reached the stairwell, I heard my name again. This time, it sounded like a classmate I trusted. My body reacted before my mind did. I stopped walking without turning around. The voice sounded concerned, almost worried. It asked why I was leaving so fast. I swallowed hard and kept my eyes on the stairs. Every instinct told me not to respond. The voice continued, now sounding closer. It said it needed help and didn't know where everyone went. I tightened my grip on my bag and forced myself to move. Each step down the stairs felt heavier than the last. Halfway down, I heard something behind me. It sounded like someone stepping on the same stair I had just left. I didn't look back. I couldn't. By the time I reached the ground floor, my legs were shaking. The sound stopped the moment I pushed open the exit door. Outside, the air felt warmer. The normal sounds of the street grounded me instantly. I went straight home and didn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the voice, how familiar and calm it sounded. The next day, I asked around discreetly. I wanted to know if anyone else had experienced something similar. At first, no one admitted anything. People laughed it off or changed the subject. Eventually, one classmate pulled me aside. She told me she heard voices too, but pretended she didn't. She said it always sounded like someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to follow. Another student shared a similar story weeks later. He said he heard his own voice calling him from a restroom. None of these stories were officially reported. People were afraid of being labeled crazy. The guards knew, though. They always knew. One guard quietly warned me to never answer voices inside empty buildings. He said the school had a history no one liked to discuss. According to him, there had been an incident years ago involving a student who stayed too late. The details were never made public. All that was known was that the student was found disoriented, hiding in a classroom he didn't recognize. He kept insisting someone was calling him all night. After graduation, I thought leaving the school behind would end everything. I believed distance would erase the fear. For a long time, it did. Years passed without incident. Then one evening at work, I stayed late again. Old habits die hard. The office was quiet, and I was focused on finishing a report. I didn't notice the time slipping by. When I finally stood up, the lights around the office were already dimmed. Most people had gone home. As I walked toward the elevator, I heard someone say my name. The voice came from behind a cubicle. It sounded exactly like a coworker who had left hours earlier. My stomach dropped instantly. I didn't answer. I didn't look. I walked faster, pretending I heard nothing. The voice didn't follow this time. That was when I realized something. It wasn't the place that mattered. It was the moment you were alone, the moment you hesitated. Whatever it was, it didn't force you. It waited. To this day, I don't stay late anywhere if I can avoid it. And if I hear my name when I know I'm alone, I keep walking and never answer. Because the scariest part isn't hearing something unnatural. It's hearing something that sounds exactly like someone you trust, and knowing that, for just a second, you almost believed it. My name is Daniel, and this is a real experience I had during my second year of college. I'm not someone who scares easily, and before this, I never believed schools could feel threatening. Our campus was old, with several buildings dating back decades. Some of the classrooms were barely renovated, and at night the place felt frozen in time. I was part of the student council, which meant staying late after classes ended. Meetings usually finished around 9 in the evening. Most students were gone by then, and only a few lights stayed on across campus. The guards mostly stayed near the main entrance. One night, after a long meeting, I realized I left my notebook in a classroom on the second floor. I decided to go back alone, since it would only take a minute. The hallway was quiet in a way that made every sound feel louder. My footsteps echoed even though I was walking slowly. When I reached the classroom, the door was already unlocked. I clearly remembered locking it earlier. I stepped inside and turned on the light. Everything looked normal at first. As I grabbed my notebook, I heard the door close behind me. The sound was soft, but it was unmistakable. I assumed it was one of my classmates messing around. I turned around to say something. No one was there. I laughed nervously and told myself the door must have moved because of the wind. Still, I locked it before leaving. As I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed the lights flickering farther down the corridor. The air felt colder than it should have. I started walking toward the stairs when I heard chairs moving inside a classroom nearby. The sound was slow, like someone dragging furniture across the floor. I stopped and listened. The sound continued, steady and deliberate. I looked at the room number and froze. That classroom had been closed for renovation for months. The door suddenly rattled, as if someone inside was trying to open it. I felt my chest tighten as panic set in. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the door. The rattling stopped the moment I moved. I turned and walked faster toward the stairs. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. They didn't sound rushed. They sounded calm. I reached the stairwell and grabbed the railing. The footsteps stopped right outside. For a few seconds, nothing happened. I stood there, barely breathing. Then I heard someone whisper my name from above. The voice echoed strangely, stretched and hollow. I looked up instinctively and immediately regretted it. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt like something was watching me. I ran down the stairs without looking back. My legs felt weak, but fear pushed me forward. When I reached the ground floor, I nearly collided with a security guard. He asked why I looked so pale. I tried to explain what happened, but the words came out rushed and broken. His expression turned serious very quickly. He told me the second floor was known for incidents after hours. He said students often reported sounds coming from locked rooms. According to him, years ago a fire had broken out in that wing of the building. A class was evacuated, but not everyone made it out immediately. Since then, the rooms were rarely used at night. Some guards refused to patrol that floor alone. I stopped attending late meetings after that. I always made sure to leave with someone else. Even now, when I walk into empty buildings, I pay attention to doors, especially the ones that close too quietly. What scares me most isn't what I saw, because I never saw anything clearly. It's what I heard. Because whatever followed me that night didn't need to run. It knew I would leave on my own. After that incident, I tried to avoid the second floor entirely. Even during the day, something about it felt wrong. The classrooms there always seemed darker than the rest of the building. The lights were on, but the corners never felt fully lit. A week later, I had no choice but to return. One of my required classes was temporarily moved to that floor due to repairs elsewhere. I told myself daytime would be different. People were around, and fear had a way of shrinking under sunlight. The first few sessions passed without incident. Still, I noticed how quiet the room felt compared to others. Even when the class was full, sound didn't travel properly. Voices felt muted, like they were being absorbed. One afternoon, our professor dismissed us early. Most students left quickly, eager to beat traffic. I stayed behind to pack my things properly. By the time I looked up, I was alone again. That familiar tension crept back into my chest. I suddenly became aware of how silent the room was. As I slung my bag over my shoulder, I heard a soft tapping sound. It came from the back wall of the classroom. At first, I thought it was construction noise, but the tapping was rhythmic, almost deliberate. Tap, pause, tap. I stood still and listened. The sound stopped the moment I focused on it. I left the room immediately. In the hallway, I noticed the air felt colder than usual. As I walked toward the stairs, I passed the classroom that had rattled the night of the meeting. The door was sealed shut with a heavy lock. I slowed down without realizing it. Something about the door pulled my attention. From inside, I heard a faint sound. It was too soft to identify at first. I leaned closer, against my better judgment. That was when I heard breathing. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It sounded tired, shallow, and close to the door. I stepped back, my heart racing. The breathing stopped instantly. I didn't stay to investigate. I rushed down the stairs and left the building. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that sound again. The next day, I asked one of the janitors about the second floor. He hesitated before answering. He said they were told never to work there alone after sunset. When I asked why, he changed the subject. A few days later, I overheard two guards talking quietly. They stopped when they noticed me nearby. I caught one phrase before they went silent. It copies voices. That was enough to make my stomach drop. It reminded me of how calm the footsteps sounded that night. Near the end of the semester, something happened that confirmed my fear. A freshman went missing for several hours after staying late to study. They found him sitting in an empty classroom on the second floor. He couldn't explain how he got there. He kept saying someone asked him for help, someone who sounded familiar. After that incident, the administration restricted access to the floor after 6 in the evening. Officially, it was for safety reasons. Unofficially, everyone knew why. No one argued. I graduated a year later and left the campus behind. I thought distance would finally erase the memory. But sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet building, I hear footsteps that don't rush. Footsteps that match my pace. When that happens, I don't stop to check. I don't call out. I just leave. Because whatever waits in empty schools doesn't chase you. It waits for you to believe you're not alone. And once you do, it already knows your name. My name is Mrs. Elaine Torres, and I've been teaching for more than 15 years. I've worked in different schools, but what happened during my time at one public high school is something I've never fully spoken about. I was assigned as an English teacher, handling both morning and afternoon classes. Like most teachers, I often stayed late to prepare lessons and check papers. The school itself was old, built long before modern renovations became common. Its walls were thick, and the rooms carried sound in strange ways. Teachers usually left before sunset, but I preferred staying late. The quiet helped me focus, and I felt safe knowing guards were still on duty. One evening, I stayed past 7 to finish grading. The building was nearly empty by then. The hallway outside my classroom was silent, lit only by a few fluorescent lights. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt. As I packed my bag, I heard movement outside. It sounded like slow footsteps passing my door. I assumed it was a guard doing rounds. I didn't bother checking. A few minutes later, I heard a soft knock on my classroom door. It was gentle, almost polite. I called out, asking who it was. No one answered. I walked to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty. I felt a slight unease but brushed it off. Schools make strange noises when they're quiet. As I turned back to my desk, I heard a chair scrape behind me. The sound came from the back of the classroom. My heart skipped. I was certain I was alone. I slowly turned around. All the chairs were in place. I told myself I was tired and overworked. That explanation felt reasonable enough. A few minutes later, I heard my name being called. It sounded like one of my former students. The voice was calm and respectful, the way students usually spoke to teachers. It asked if I was still there. I replied without thinking, telling them I was finishing work. There was no response. I stepped into the hallway and looked around. Once again, no one was there. That was when I noticed something strange. The lights farther down the corridor were off, even though they were supposed to stay on. I felt uncomfortable standing there alone. I went back inside and locked my classroom door. As I sat down, the voice returned. This time it came from inside the room. It called my name again, closer than before. The tone was familiar, almost comforting. I stood up so fast my chair nearly fell. My chest felt tight, and my hands started shaking. I asked who was there, trying to sound firm. The voice didn't answer. Instead, I heard another chair move. This time, it was unmistakable. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. As I unlocked it, I heard footsteps behind me. They weren't fast or threatening. They followed at the same pace I walked. I didn't turn around. I walked straight down the hallway toward the stairs. Halfway there, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. When I reached the ground floor, I saw one of the guards. I felt immediate relief. I asked him if any students were still inside the building. His answer made my stomach drop. He said no students were allowed inside after 6. I had been alone the entire time. I told him what I heard. His face changed the moment I mentioned the voice. He said teachers had reported similar things over the years. Most stopped staying late after it happened. The next day, I spoke to another teacher. She admitted she heard someone calling her name weeks earlier. After that, I stopped staying late. I finished my work at home no matter how busy I was. I still teach, but I never stay alone in empty buildings anymore. When I hear my name in quiet places, I wait until I see a face before answering, because schools remember voices, and sometimes they repeat them. I thought that would be the end of it. I truly believed leaving early would make everything stop. For a while it did. Weeks passed without incident, and my routine felt normal again. Then the school announced mandatory remedial classes. Teachers were required to stay late once a week. I tried to request an exemption. It was denied. The first remedial session ended just after 7 in the evening. I made sure to leave immediately. The second week, a sudden rainstorm delayed the guards' rounds. The building emptied faster than usual. By the time I locked my classroom, the hallway was quiet again. That familiar silence returned. I walked briskly, not allowing myself to think. My keys felt cold in my hand. Halfway down the corridor, I heard papers fall behind me. The sound echoed too clearly. I stopped. The sound stopped with me. I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings make noises when temperatures change. When I resumed walking, I heard footsteps again. They were light, careful, and matched my pace. I didn't look back. I kept walking. Near the faculty room, I heard my name whispered. This time, it wasn't a student. It sounded like my colleague, a teacher who had transferred years ago. The voice asked if I needed help. The concern in it felt genuine. I nearly answered. Habit almost won. I remembered something the guard had said weeks earlier. Never respond unless you see someone. I walked faster. The whisper followed once more, closer now. When I reached the stairs, the voice stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the sound. As I descended, I felt watched. Not threatened, just observed. The next morning, I asked the guard about my former colleague. He went quiet. He told me she used to stay late often, until one night she didn't go home at all. They found her hours later, sitting in an empty classroom. She kept insisting she was helping someone. After that, she transferred schools. She never stayed late again. I stopped attending remedial classes after that semester. I submitted my lesson plans digitally. Years later, I transferred to a newer school. Bright hallways, modern lights, security cameras everywhere. I thought the feeling would disappear completely. Most days it does. But sometimes, when I'm alone grading papers and the building goes quiet, I hear movement outside my door. I don't answer anymore. I wait. Because in schools, familiarity is dangerous. The voices know your habits, your tone, your name. And the longer you stay, the easier it is for them to sound like someone you trust.